The golden rays of a Monday morning sun poured through the towering windows of the bustling courthouse in Washington, D.C. Among the crowd, Dr. Eleanor Maxwell, a distinguished professor of constitutional law at Columbia University, sat quietly, adjusting the navy blazer that complemented her professional demeanor. At 54 years old, Eleanor carried herself with the poised assurance of a woman who had spent over 2 decades shaping the minds of future legal professionals. Ordinarily, Eleanor's work revolved around academic research and writing groundbreaking papers on systemic bias in the judicial system. Her life was centered on libraries, lecture halls, and conferences. Yet that day was different. Drawn by the surge in complaints of racial discrimination and traffic violations, Eleanor found herself seated on the wooden benches of traffic court. The courthouse hummed with the activity of a regular weekday. Security guards nodded to familiar faces, clerks sifted through piles of paperwork, and defendants whispered anxiously to their attorneys. Eleanor watched the scene unfold, her sharp, observant eyes noting every subtle interaction. Her notepad rested on her lap, ready to record how biases manifested in the courtroom. How some defendants received courteous smiles, while others were interrupted mid-sentence. Few people in the room would have recognized her as one of the country's foremost legal scholars. Eleanor, whose scholarly articles were essential reading in top law schools, had shaped numerous attorneys and judges over the years. But on this day, she chose to blend in, dressed modestly in her blazer and a pencil skirt. She sat unnoticed, just another professional contesting what seemed like a trivial parking ticket. Her citation had stemmed from an alleged parking violation on P Street. Eleanor had initially planned to pay the fine online, but reconsidered when she remembered the dismissive attitude of the officer who issued the ticket. The signage at the location was partially obscured, and Eleanor felt compelled to challenge the ticket, not for the fine itself, but for the principle of fairness. As more people filtered into the courtroom, Eleanor noticed how the space naturally divided itself along social lines. Groups of defendants, attorneys, and visitors clustered in separate corners, forming an invisible barrier of unspoken divisions. Her years of research made her keenly aware of the small, yet significant signs of anxiety in those waiting for their cases. Some fidgeted nervously, others looked resigned, and a few carried an air of confidence that suggested familiarity with the system. At precisely 9 a.m., the bailiff's commanding voice rang through the courtroom, calling everyone to rise. Eleanor stood, her posture relaxed but dignified. Judge Robert Stanton entered, his black robes billowing behind him as he strode purposefully to his seat. At just 36 years old, Judge Stanton was one of the youngest appointments to the traffic court bench in D.C., yet he had already developed a reputation for his no-nonsense approach. Strict in his rulings, Stanton was known for being particularly harsh with minority defendants. What Judge Stanton did not know was that among the many individuals awaiting judgment that morning was the professor who had once guided him through the complexities of constitutional law. Eleanor had not only taught Stanton during his time at Columbia, but had also written one of his letters of recommendation for judicial appointment. Eleanor observed him closely as the morning proceedings began. His confident stride, sharp tone, and efficient handling of cases painted a picture of a man determined to maintain order. However, to her experienced eye, Stanton's approach carried traces of bias, subtle but undeniable. He interrupted defendants frequently, dismissing their explanations with an air of impatience. This, she noted, was not the impartial justice she had taught in her classroom. Eleanor sat quietly through the first few cases, documenting each interaction with the detached precision of a scholar. Then at last her name was called. Case number 37, Eleanor Maxwell, parking violation on P Street, announced the clerk. Eleanor rose gracefully and approached the podium with measured steps. Her demeanor was calm, exuding the quiet confidence of someone well-versed in courtroom proceedings. She carried herself differently from the other defendants, a fact not lost on the attorneys and observers present, many of whom watched her with interest. Judge Stanton barely glanced up from his docket as he addressed her. "Dr. Maxwell," he began in a stern, clipped tone, "you are charged with parking in a restricted zone during prohibited hours. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Eleanor replied evenly. She began to explain the circumstances of the parking citation, noting the unclear signage and the obstructive overgrowth of branches that had made the restrictions impossible to read. She had prepared photographic evidence to support her claim, which she now offered to present. But Stanton cut her off mid-sentence, his voice growing sharper. Dr. Maxwell, the officer's report clearly states the signage was visible. Are you suggesting the officer fabricated his account? A murmur rippled through the room. The judge's tone was noticeably harsher than it had been in previous cases, and several attorneys exchanged knowing glances. Yet Eleanor remained unfazed. Your Honor, she replied calmly, I am simply stating that the signage was partially obscured, as my photographs will demonstrate. Stanton, however, waved her off dismissively. That won't be necessary, he said curtly. The responsibility for understanding parking regulations falls on the driver, not the city. Eleanor stood her ground, her voice steady. With all due respect, Your Honor, the conditions at the location made compliance impossible. My evidence is directly relevant to this case. The tension in the courtroom mounted as their exchange continued. Stanton's tone became increasingly impatient, his responses brusque and dismissive. Eleanor, by contrast, maintained her poise, addressing each of his points with the same composure she had brought to decades of teaching. After several minutes of back and forth, Stanton delivered his verdict with finality. Dr. Maxwell, this court finds you guilty of violating Municipal Parking Code 12.3. I am imposing a fine of $600, given your clear disregard for regulations and your attempt to challenge the officer's integrity. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The fine was 6 times the standard penalty for such a violation, a glaringly disproportionate punishment. Even the seasoned attorneys present seemed taken aback by Stanton's decision. Many began scribbling notes, sensing that this was no ordinary case. Eleanor, however, remained impassive. Her expression did not betray a hint of anger or frustration. Instead, she adjusted her glasses and replied, Thank you, Your Honor. I accept the court's decision. She paused deliberately, then added, I must, however, inform the court that this fine will necessitate the early adjournment of my constitutional law lecture at Columbia University this afternoon, a class that Judge Stanton may recall attending as a student 10 years ago. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Judge Robert Stanton's pen froze mid-motion as Eleanor Maxwell's words reverberated through the room. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he looked up from the citation before him, his gaze locking onto the woman standing at the defendant's podium. Recognition washed over his face like a wave crashing onto the shore. Dr. Eleanor Maxwell. The name he had dismissed as vaguely familiar only hours earlier now struck him with undeniable clarity. Memories came flooding back, her voice echoing through the lecture halls, her piercing questions challenging his assumptions, and her unwavering commitment to teaching the true meaning of justice and fairness. She had not just been his professor. She had been his mentor, the one who had shaped his understanding of law and principles, the one who had written the glowing recommendation that secured his judicial appointment. Judge Stanton's usually composed expression faltered. His face turned pale, and his posture stiffened as the weight of realization bore down on him. The courtroom, sensing the significance of the moment, remained deathly quiet. Even the clerks and bailiffs, accustomed to the monotony of traffic court, sat motionless, their eyes darting between the judge and the defendant. Eleanor stood tall and serene, her composed demeanor unshaken by the tension that now gripped the room. She adjusted her papers with deliberate precision, waiting patiently. There was no gloating in her expression, no triumph. Instead, she carried the quiet authority of a teacher who knew that the moment itself held the lesson, one that required no additional commentary. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, as Stanton wrestled with the implications of his actions. His mind replayed the entire hearing, from his interruptions to his dismissal of her evidence, and finally, his imposition of an excessive fine. He had judged her, not as an individual presenting a case, but as part of a system he had unconsciously perpetuated. The principles she had instilled in him, justice, fairness, and humility, had been ignored in his pursuit of maintaining control and authority. The judge finally cleared his throat, his voice shaky as he broke the silence. 10-minute recess, he announced abruptly, his gavel striking the sound block with a loud, echoing crack. Without another glance at Eleanor or anyone else in the courtroom, he rose from his seat and retreated to his chambers, his robes billowing behind him. Inside the solitude of his office, Stanton collapsed into his leather chair, his mind racing. His hands trembled as he pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk, retrieving a well-worn Columbia University yearbook. Flipping through the pages, he stopped at a familiar photo, Dr. Eleanor Maxwell, her stern yet kind expression immortalized in the faculty section. Memories of her lectures came flooding back. Her insistence on questioning assumptions, her unyielding emphasis on equality before the law, and her vivid examples of how unconscious bias could distort even the most well-meaning judgment. On the wall of his chambers hung the framed letter of recommendation she had written for him a decade ago. Stanton's eyes fell on it now, the words seeming to mock him in his moment of shame. She had described him as a promising young mind with an unwavering commitment to justice, words that now felt hollow. How far he had strayed from those ideals in his pursuit of order and efficiency. The knock on his door signaled the end of the recess. Stanton took a deep breath, straightened his robes, and walked to the mirror. The face staring back at him was not the confident young judge he had envisioned, but a man humbled by his own failings. He squared his shoulders and prepared to return to the courtroom, knowing that what he said next would define his career and his character. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as Stanton re-entered. The confident stride he had exhibited earlier was replaced by a slower, more deliberate pace. He took his seat and looked out over the room, his expression no longer stern but reflective. "Professor Maxwell," he began, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity. "Before we continue, I owe you and this court an apology." The murmurs ceased instantly. All eyes were fixed on the judge as he continued. "My actions this morning failed to reflect the principles I was taught, principles you, Dr. Maxwell, instilled in me. I allowed my position to blind me to my own biases, and I imposed an unjust fine without giving your case the consideration it deserved. For that, I am deeply sorry." Eleanor nodded slightly, her face calm but attentive. "I am vacating the $600 fine," Stanton declared, "and dismissing this case entirely. The evidence you attempted to present is clear, and the signage at the cited location was indeed obstructed. This court was wrong in its initial assessment." The courtroom, stunned into silence moments earlier, now erupted into whispered conversations. Attorneys exchanged glances, some nodding in approval, others scribbling notes. Stanton raised his hand, signaling for quiet, and the room quickly fell silent again. He turned his attention to the entire courtroom. This experience serves as a reminder, not just to me, but to all of us, of the importance of humility and self-reflection in the pursuit of justice. Our duty is not simply to uphold the law, but to do so without prejudice, with fairness and respect for every individual who stands before us. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice measured and steady. "Thank you, Your Honor. True justice requires not perfection, but the willingness to recognize and correct our mistakes. Today, this courtroom witnessed that important truth." Her words carried the weight of decades of experience, and they resonated deeply with everyone present. Stanton gave her a respectful nod, his expression filled with gratitude and newfound understanding. The proceedings resumed, but the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. Stanton approached each subsequent case with a renewed sense of fairness, listening attentively and weighing each piece of evidence with care. Observers noted the transformation, and word of the remarkable morning spread quickly through the courthouse. Months later, Stanton and Eleanor stood side by side in a lecture hall at Columbia University, addressing a captivated audience of law students and faculty. Stanton recounted the day that had changed his perspective, using it as a teaching tool to highlight the insidious nature of unconscious bias. "It wasn't just about a parking ticket," Stanton told the audience. It was about seeing the humanity in every individual and recognizing how easily we can fail to live up to the principles we hold dear. Justice requires constant vigilance, not just in the courtroom, but within ourselves. Eleanor smiled at her former student, proud of the transformation she had witnessed. Together, they had turned a moment of error into a profound lesson for a new generation of legal minds. From that day forward, Stanton's courtroom became known for its fairness and respect, a testament to the enduring impact of Eleanor Maxwell's teachings. And for those who had witnessed that pivotal moment in traffic court, it remained a powerful reminder of the ongoing journey toward justice and equality. The lecture at Columbia University became a defining moment not just for Judge Stanton, but for Eleanor Maxwell as well. For Stanton, it was an opportunity to confront his past mistakes and use them as a teaching tool. For Eleanor, it was proof that the lessons she had devoted her life to imparting could ripple outward, shaping the legal profession in ways both immediate and profound. The story of their courtroom encounter spread beyond the lecture halls. Legal journals picked it up, dissecting every detail of the incident as a case study in judicial humility. Articles praised Eleanor's composure and Stanton's willingness to acknowledge his errors. Training programs across the country adopted the case as a model for educating young judges about bias and self-awareness. It became known as the Maxwell Lesson, a touchstone for those committed to upholding the integrity of the legal system. Meanwhile, Stanton's transformation became evident in his courtroom. Attorneys who once braced themselves for his strict rulings began noticing a softer, more deliberate approach. He now took time to listen to each defendant, ensuring they felt heard regardless of their background. Observers remarked on his fairness, a stark contrast to the rigid, authoritarian figure he had once been. Eleanor continued her work with renewed vigor, incorporating the courtroom encounter into her curriculum. Her students were captivated by the real-world application of the principles she taught. She challenged them to consider not just the law, but the humanity behind it, urging them to reflect on their own biases and assumptions. Her classes became more popular than ever, drawing students eager to learn from a professor whose lessons transcended the classroom. The ripple effects of their encounter extended far beyond Washington, D.C. Judicial reform advocates seized upon the incident as evidence of the need for systemic change. Courts in several states began implementing new guidelines for addressing bias, requiring judges to attend workshops on fairness and impartiality. Data analysts tracked a measurable reduction in sentencing disparities, attributing part of the shift to the widespread influence of the Maxwell lesson. For Stanton, every day in court became a reminder of the moment that had changed him. He often thought back to the framed recommendation letter hanging in his chambers, now a symbol not of pride, but of accountability. He had come to see his role not as an enforcer of the law, but as a steward of justice, a duty that demanded humility and constant self-reflection. One day, Stanton invited Eleanor back to his courtroom, not as a defendant, but as a guest speaker for a special session on judicial ethics. The courtroom was packed with young lawyers, law students, and even fellow judges eager to hear her perspective. Eleanor spoke with the same clarity and passion that had once captivated Stanton as her student. Justice, she said, is not a destination. It is a journey, one that requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our systems. It is not enough to know the law. We must also understand the people it serves and the ways in which we, as interpreters of that law, can fail them. Stanton listened intently, her words striking a chord as they always had. When it was his turn to speak, he addressed the audience candidly. I was fortunate, he admitted, to have a mentor who not only taught me the principles of justice, but also held me accountable when I fell short. That accountability is what ensures we remain worthy of the trust placed in us as judges and lawyers. Their combined message resonated deeply with those in attendance, many of whom would go on to cite the session as a turning point in their own careers. Eleanor and Stanton's partnership became a powerful symbol of the legal profession's capacity for growth and redemption. As the years passed, Eleanor continued to shape the next generation of legal minds, her influence expanding through her writing, teaching, and advocacy. Stanton, too, continued his journey, becoming a respected figure in the judiciary known for his fairness and thoughtfulness. The two remained close, their shared experience forging a bond that transcended the boundaries of teacher and student. Decades later, Stanton would reflect on the pivotal moment that had altered the course of his career. "It wasn't the fine or the courtroom drama that changed me," he would say in an interview. "It was the realization that justice isn't about being right. It's about doing right. And sometimes, doing right means admitting you were wrong." Eleanor, in her quiet, steadfast way, continued to teach by example. To her, the courtroom encounter was not an isolated event, but part of a larger tapestry of moments that defined her life's work. It was a reminder that the fight for justice was ongoing, that the lessons she imparted could resonate far beyond the confines of her classroom. For those who witnessed the transformation of Judge Stanton and the wisdom of Dr. Maxwell, the story became a legend in its own right. It served as a beacon for aspiring legal professionals, a reminder that the pursuit of justice was as much about self-awareness as it was about the law itself. Together, Eleanor Maxwell and Robert Stanton proved that even the smallest moments, like a parking ticket dispute, could spark profound change, illuminating the path toward a fairer and more equitable legal system. Years after the pivotal courtroom exchange, the legacy of that moment continued to ripple outward, shaping the careers of countless individuals who had encountered its lessons. Judge Robert Stanton, now serving in a higher court, carried the memory of that day with him into every decision he made. His reputation as a fair and reflective jurist had grown, and he often used his own experience as a cautionary tale for new judges during training seminars. At one such seminar, Stanton addressed an audience of newly appointed judges. The room was filled with eager faces, each carrying the weight of the responsibility they were about to undertake. Stanton spoke with the measured authority that had come to define him, his voice carrying the same humility that had been born in that traffic courtroom years ago. "As judges," he began, "we are entrusted with an immense power to make decisions that can profoundly affect the lives of others. But that power comes with a responsibility to constantly examine ourselves. The greatest danger we face is not from external forces, but from the biases we carry within." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "Years ago, I was reminded of this in the most humbling way. I allowed my own assumptions and impatience to cloud my judgment. I dismissed a defendant without truly listening, without truly seeing them. That defendant turned out to be my former professor, someone who had taught me the very principles I had failed to uphold. It was a moment I will never forget, and it changed me, not just as a judge, but as a person." The room was silent, the gravity of his story sinking in. Many of the new judges scribbled notes, while others sat in quiet reflection. Stanton continued, recounting how that experience had shaped his approach to justice and urging his audience to embrace the same self-awareness. Meanwhile, Dr. Eleanor Maxwell's work at Columbia had taken on a life of its own. The case involving Judge Stanton had become a cornerstone of her teaching, and her classes were now more popular than ever. Students from across the country sought her out, eager to learn from the professor whose lessons had reshaped a judge's career and sparked a national conversation about bias in the legal system. Eleanor, however, remained humble about her role in the story. To her, it was simply one example of the broader work she had dedicated her life to, ensuring that justice was not just a theoretical ideal, but a lived reality. She often told her students, "The law is a tool, but its effectiveness depends on the hands that wield it. Our responsibility is to ensure those hands are guided by fairness, compassion, and an unflinching commitment to equality." Her words resonated deeply with her students, many of whom went on to influential positions in law and public policy. Among them were attorneys who argued landmark cases, judges who reformed outdated practices, and policymakers who implemented systemic changes to address bias in the courts. One of those students, inspired by Eleanor's teachings and the story of her courtroom encounter with Stanton, spearheaded a project to analyze sentencing disparities in traffic courts nationwide. The study revealed stark patterns of bias, prompting several states to enact reforms that made their judicial systems more transparent and equitable. The project's findings were dedicated to Eleanor Maxwell, a testament to her enduring influence. For Eleanor and Stanton, their paths continued to intersect over the years. They often collaborated on panels and lectures, sharing their story with audiences ranging from law students to senior members of the judiciary. Their partnership became a symbol of the power of accountability and the potential for growth, even in the face of failure. At one such event, held in the grand auditorium of a judicial conference, Eleanor and Stanton sat side by side on stage. The room was packed with judges, attorneys, and legal scholars, all eager to hear from the duo whose story had become a touchstone for the profession. When asked by an audience member how they viewed their shared experience in hindsight, Stanton was the first to answer. "It was the most humbling moment of my career," he said, "but it was also the most transformative. It taught me that justice isn't static. It's a continuous process of learning and self-correction. I'm grateful for that lesson, even though it came at the cost of my pride." Eleanor smiled at his response before adding her own perspective. "What happened that day wasn't about me or Judge Stanton as individuals. It was about the broader principles that guide us as legal professionals. It was a reminder that justice requires vigilance, humility, and, most importantly, the courage to acknowledge when we've fallen short." Their words left a profound impact on the audience, sparking a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. For those in attendance, it was clear that the story of Eleanor Maxwell and Robert Stanton was not just about a single moment in a courtroom. It was about the enduring fight for justice and the role each individual must play in that fight. As they left the stage, Eleanor turned to Stanton and said, "You've come a long way since that day in traffic court." Stanton chuckled, his tone tinged with gratitude. "Thanks to you, Professor. I'll never stop trying to live up to the lessons you taught me." Their bond, forged in the crucible of accountability, remained strong. Together, they continued to inspire a new generation of legal minds, ensuring that the principles of justice and fairness remained at the heart of the profession. And for those who heard their story, it was a reminder that even the smallest moments, like a parking ticket dispute, could ignite change that reverberated far beyond the walls of a courtroom. Over time, the story of Dr. Eleanor Maxwell and Judge Robert Stanton became a beacon of inspiration in legal circles. It was retold in classrooms, legal seminars, and conferences as an example of how humility and self-awareness could transform not only individuals but also institutions. Yet, for both Eleanor and Stanton, the work was far from finished. They understood that the fight for fairness and justice was an ongoing battle, one that required constant effort and vigilance. Eleanor, now a renowned figure whose influence extended far beyond academia, was often invited to advise on judicial reform initiatives. Her research on unconscious bias became the foundation for training programs implemented in courts across the country. She worked closely with bar associations and legal advocacy groups to push for policies that would ensure equal treatment for all. Despite her fame, she remained grounded, continuing to teach with the same passion and commitment that had defined her career. In her lectures, she often referenced her experience in Stanton's courtroom, not as a moment of personal triumph, but as a teaching opportunity. What happened that day, she would tell her students, was not about exposing a single judge's bias. It was about demonstrating that justice is a collective effort. We must all hold ourselves accountable to the ideals we claim to uphold. Her students, inspired by her words, often carried her lessons into their own careers. Some became public defenders, fighting for marginalized communities. Others became prosecutors who prioritized fairness over conviction rates. Many pursued judicial appointments, vowing to approach their roles with the integrity and introspection that Eleanor had taught them. Meanwhile, Stanton's career also evolved. His reputation as a fair and thoughtful judge grew, and he was eventually appointed to a federal appellate court. In his new role, he focused on ensuring that the principles of fairness and equality were reflected in his decisions. He often cited his former professor as a source of guidance, and her influence could be seen in the meticulous care he took in each case. One of Stanton's first major rulings on the appellate bench involved a case of alleged racial profiling by law enforcement. In his written opinion, He emphasized the importance of examining systemic biases and the responsibility of the judiciary to address them. The decision was widely praised and became a landmark ruling that set a precedent for similar cases across the country. Eleanor and Stanton's paths continued to cross, their partnership becoming a symbol of collaboration and mutual respect. They were often invited to speak together at events, their dynamic a testament to the power of mentorship and accountability. Audiences were captivated by their story, but more importantly, they were moved to action. Legal professionals who heard them speak often left with a renewed commitment to self-reflection and fairness in their own practices. At one such event, a young law student approached Eleanor during a break. "Professor Maxwell," she began, her voice filled with admiration, "your story with Judge Stanton is so powerful. But do you ever feel frustrated that change is so slow, that there's still so much bias in the system?" Eleanor smiled gently, her eyes reflecting both the weight of experience and the hope she carried. "Change is slow," she admitted, "but it's also inevitable if we keep pushing for it. Each step forward, no matter how small, is progress. And every person who learns to see their own biases and correct them is part of that change." Stanton, overhearing the conversation, added, "The key is not to aim for perfection, but to strive for progress. We all make mistakes, but what defines us is how we respond to those mistakes. That's a lesson I had to learn the hard way, and it's one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." Their words resonated deeply with the student, who later went on to write an influential paper on judicial accountability, inspired by their story. As the years went by, the impact of the Maxwell lesson continued to grow. Eleanor published a book titled Justice in Practice, Lessons from the Courtroom and Beyond, which became a bestseller and a required text in many law schools. Stanton wrote the foreword, candidly recounting how their encounter had reshaped his understanding of his role as a judge. The book sparked widespread discussion in legal circles, leading to the implementation of new policies aimed at reducing bias in the judiciary. Courts adopted more transparent procedures, and judges were required to undergo regular training on fairness and impartiality. These changes, though incremental, marked a significant step toward a more equitable legal system. Despite their busy schedules, Eleanor and Stanton remained close friends. They often met to discuss their work and reflect on the journey they had shared. For both of them, the memory of that fateful day in traffic court was a reminder of the power of accountability and the potential for growth. One evening, as they sat in Eleanor's study discussing a new initiative Stanton was leading, he turned to her and said, "I owe so much of who I am today to you. Not just because of that day in court, but because of everything you taught me before and after. You've shown me what it means to truly seek justice." Eleanor, ever humble, shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, Robert. You made the choice to learn and grow. That's what matters. And now, you're teaching others to do the same." Their conversation drifted to other topics, but the sentiment lingered. Both knew that their work was far from finished, but they also knew that they had made a difference. Together, they had proven that even the smallest moments, a parking ticket, a courtroom exchange, could spark change that reverberated far beyond their immediate impact. In the end, their shared story was not just about redemption or transformation. It was about the enduring fight for justice and the belief that, with humility and perseverance, that fight could lead to a better, fairer world. As the years went on, Eleanor Maxwell and Robert Stanton became more than just symbols of justice and accountability. They became catalysts for systemic change. Their individual efforts, intertwined with their shared history, inspired a movement within the legal community that rippled outward, touching institutions and individuals far beyond their immediate circles. Eleanor's book, Justice in Practice, Lessons from the Courtroom and Beyond, continued to shape discussions about bias and fairness. It became a foundational text in judicial training programs, not only in the United States, but internationally. Legal scholars praised her ability to blend theory with real-world examples, making complex issues accessible and actionable. Her work inspired similar research in other fields, including policing, education, and healthcare, where implicit bias often had devastating consequences. One of the most groundbreaking initiatives Eleanor spearheaded was the creation of the Justice Equity Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting fairness in the legal system. The project brought together judges, lawyers, activists, and researchers to develop practical tools for addressing bias at every level of the judiciary. With Stanton's support, the project introduced new protocols for courtrooms, including mandatory review panels for sentencing disparities and anonymous feedback systems for defendants and attorneys. Meanwhile, Stanton's judicial career continued to flourish. His reputation as a thoughtful and compassionate jurist earned him widespread respect, culminating in his nomination to the United States Court of Appeals. During his confirmation hearing, Stanton candidly addressed his journey, sharing the story of his encounter with Eleanor Maxwell and how it had reshaped his approach to justice. Senators on both sides of the aisle commended his honesty and his commitment to fairness, and his confirmation was nearly unanimous. On the appellate bench, Stanton became a vocal advocate for reforms aimed at making the legal system more equitable. He authored several opinions that cited Eleanor's research, and his rulings often reflected the nuanced understanding of justice he had developed over the years. His decisions were seen as a benchmark for judicial integrity, and his colleagues often sought his guidance on complex cases. Despite their growing influence, neither Eleanor nor Stanton allowed their roles to distance them from the people they served. Eleanor continued to teach, though she took on fewer classes as her work with the Justice Equity Project expanded. She relished her time with students, often inviting them to challenge her ideas and engage in spirited debates. The pursuit of justice, she would tell them, is not about reaching a final destination. It's about asking better questions and finding better answers every day. Stanton, too, remained accessible, frequently speaking at community events and mentoring young lawyers. He believed that bridging the gap between the judiciary and the public was essential for building trust in the legal system. His efforts to humanize the role of a judge, sharing his own mistakes and growth, resonated deeply with those who heard him speak. Their partnership also deepened over time. Though their work often took them in different directions, they made it a point to collaborate on key projects and to support each other's initiatives. One of their most impactful joint efforts was a nationwide campaign to implement judicial accountability boards, independent bodies tasked with reviewing complaints of bias or misconduct. The initiative faced significant resistance at first, but Eleanor and Stanton's combined credibility helped garner public and institutional support. Within 5 years, the boards had been adopted in nearly half the states, leading to measurable improvements in trust and transparency. Their influence extended beyond the legal realm. Artists, filmmakers, and writers found inspiration in their story, creating works that captured the transformative power of accountability and growth. A critically acclaimed documentary, The Lesson, chronicled their journey and its impact on the justice system. It won multiple awards and became required viewing in law schools and judicial training programs. Despite their growing prominence, Eleanor and Stanton remained grounded. They often reflected on how a seemingly routine parking ticket dispute had set their lives on an unexpected path. For Eleanor, it reaffirmed her belief in the power of education and mentorship. For Stanton, it was a constant reminder of the importance of humility and self-awareness. One particularly memorable moment came during a reunion at Columbia University, where Eleanor was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Stanton was invited to introduce her, and as he took the stage, he struggled to contain his emotion. "Dr. Maxwell," he began, his voice steady but filled with warmth, "is the kind of teacher who doesn't just impart knowledge. She changes lives. I know this because she changed mine. She taught me that justice isn't just about rules and procedures. It's about people. It's about seeing them, hearing them, and treating them with dignity. I am who I am today because of her, and I will spend the rest of my career trying to live up to the lessons she taught me." Eleanor, visibly moved, accepted the award with her characteristic grace. In her speech, she turned the spotlight back on Stanton. "The true measure of a student's growth," she said, "is not whether they succeed, but whether they use their success to lift others." Judge Stanton exemplifies that ideal. His journey shows us that accountability is not a weakness, it's a strength. And his work reminds us that change is possible, even in the most entrenched systems. The audience erupted into applause, a testament to the profound impact both had made on their profession and beyond. As they walked off the stage together, Eleanor turned to Stanton with a wry smile. "You've come a long way from that traffic court," she said. He chuckled, his tone filled with gratitude. "Thanks to you, Professor. And I'm not done learning yet." Their story, though rooted in the past, remained a living testament to the ongoing pursuit of justice. For those who heard it, whether in classrooms, courtrooms, or communities, it was a call to action, a reminder that even the smallest moments could spark transformation and that the fight for fairness and equality was a journey worth taking. Years passed, but the legacy of Eleanor Maxwell and Robert Stanton only grew stronger. Their story had become an integral part of legal discourse, a narrative woven into the fabric of judicial reform and ethical practice. Yet, neither Eleanor nor Stanton allowed the spotlight to distract them from their purpose. For them, the work was never about accolades or recognition. It was about ensuring that justice was a lived experience for all, not just an abstract ideal. Eleanor's commitment to education continued to be the cornerstone of her influence. Despite her growing responsibilities with the Justice Equity Project and frequent speaking engagements, she made time for her students, knowing that they were the future stewards of the legal system. In her advanced constitutional law seminars, she pushed her students to grapple with difficult questions. How could the law serve as both a tool of liberation and oppression? How could lawyers and judges guard against their own biases? And most importantly, what did it mean to pursue justice in an imperfect world? Her students responded with enthusiasm, inspired by her depth of knowledge and her unwavering belief in their potential. Many of them stayed in touch long after graduation, writing to her about cases they had taken on or moments when her lessons had guided them through moral dilemmas. Eleanor often kept these letters, reading them on days when the weight of her work felt particularly heavy. They were reminders that her efforts were making a difference, even if progress sometimes felt slow. Meanwhile, Stanton's journey as a federal appellate judge brought him to the forefront of some of the most consequential legal decisions of his time. His opinions often reflected the lessons he had learned from Eleanor, blending meticulous legal reasoning with a profound respect for the human impact of his rulings. He became known for his ability to write opinions that were not only legally sound, but also accessible to the public, a rarity in a field often criticized for its opacity. One case in particular cemented his reputation as a champion of fairness. It involved a class action lawsuit against a city police department accused of discriminatory practices in traffic stops. The case had drawn national attention, with advocates arguing that the department's actions disproportionately targeted minority drivers. Stanton's opinion, a meticulously detailed and empathetic analysis of the evidence, became a landmark ruling that set a precedent for holding law enforcement accountable. In the opinion, Stanton quoted Eleanor directly, citing her groundbreaking research on systemic bias. As Dr. Eleanor Maxwell has so aptly stated, he wrote, "Justice is not merely the absence of prejudice, but the presence of equity. It requires us to actively dismantle structures that perpetuate inequality, even when those structures are deeply entrenched." The ruling sent shockwaves through the legal community, earning Stanton both praise and criticism. For him, the decision was not about public opinion, but about fulfilling his duty to uphold the principles of justice. He later reflected that the case reminded him of his own journey, a journey that began with a parking ticket and a much-needed lesson in humility. Eleanor and Stanton's friendship continued to flourish, strengthened by their shared commitment to justice. They often joked that their partnership had evolved into an unlikely but effective alliance, with Eleanor pushing for systemic change through education and advocacy, while Stanton worked from within the judiciary to implement those changes. Their collaboration became a model for how different sectors of the legal community could work together toward a common goal. One of their most ambitious projects was the establishment of the Maxwell-Stanton Fellowship, a program designed to support law students from underrepresented backgrounds. The fellowship provided financial assistance, mentorship, and opportunities to work on cases that addressed issues of systemic inequality. Both Eleanor and Stanton took an active role in the program, meeting with fellows regularly and guiding them through the complexities of the legal profession. At the program's inaugural event, Eleanor addressed the room full of bright, eager faces. "You are the future of this profession," she said, her voice steady but warm. "But being a lawyer, a judge, or an advocate is not just about winning cases or interpreting statutes. It's about using your position to amplify the voices of those who are too often silenced. It's about recognizing that every decision you make, no matter how small, has the power to shape lives." Stanton, speaking after her, echoed her sentiments. "I stand here today because of a lesson I learned in humility and accountability," he said. "That lesson taught me that justice is not a static concept. It's a practice, one that requires constant reflection and growth. My hope for all of you is that you approach your careers with the same willingness to learn and the courage to admit when you're wrong." The fellowship quickly gained national recognition, with law schools across the country vying to nominate their best students for the program. Many of its early participants went on to become influential figures in law and policy, citing the mentorship of Eleanor and Stanton as a pivotal moment in their development. As their work expanded, Eleanor and Stanton remained deeply connected to the communities they served. They often traveled together to speak at town halls, community centers, and grassroots organizations, ensuring that their message reached not just legal professionals, but also the people most affected by systemic inequities. They listened as much as they spoke, taking the time to understand the challenges and perspectives of those on the ground. One evening, after a particularly moving town hall in a small rural community, Stanton turned to Eleanor as they walked to their car. "You know," he said, "when I think about everything we've done, the cases, the reforms, the fellowship, it all comes back to that one moment in traffic court. It's incredible how something so small could lead to something so big." Eleanor smiled, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and humility. "That's the nature of justice," she replied. "It doesn't happen all at once. It starts with a spark, a single moment, and grows from there. The important thing is that we keep fanning the flames." Their work, though demanding, continued to energize them. For Eleanor, it was a continuation of a lifelong mission to ensure that the law served as a force for good. For Stanton, it was a chance to honor the lessons he had learned and to ensure that future generations of judges would approach their roles with the same sense of accountability. Together, they had turned what could have been a fleeting moment of embarrassment into a lasting legacy of growth, collaboration, and transformation. Their story became a reminder that justice is not just a destination, but a journey that requires each of us to confront our own biases, embrace humility, and strive to leave the world better than we found it. As the years unfolded, the ripple effects of Eleanor Maxwell and Robert Stanton's shared story continued to influence countless lives. Their partnership became synonymous with progress, a beacon for those who sought to reform and humanize the justice system. Yet, amid the accolades and the growing impact of their initiatives, both remained grounded in their commitment to the principles they held dear. Eleanor, though older now, maintained an active presence in academia and advocacy. Her name was frequently mentioned in discussions of judicial reform, and her influence extended into legislative debates and international forums. Her lectures were as sharp and engaging as ever, and students still packed into her classrooms, eager to hear from the professor who had become a living legend. Despite her prominence, Eleanor approached each lecture with the same care she had decades earlier. She viewed teaching not as a platform for personal acclaim, but as a sacred responsibility. Each student, she believed, represented a new opportunity to plant the seeds of fairness and critical thinking in the legal profession. Her work also expanded into mentoring younger faculty members. She recognized the importance of cultivating not just students, but also future educators who could carry on her mission. These protégés often marveled at her energy and passion, finding inspiration in her steadfast belief that change, no matter how slow, was always worth pursuing. Meanwhile, Stanton's career reached new heights when he was nominated and confirmed to serve on the Supreme Court. The news was met with widespread acclaim from legal scholars and practitioners who admired his record and the evolution of his judicial philosophy. During his confirmation hearing, Stanton's humility and candor set him apart. He spoke openly about his journey, recounting the pivotal day in traffic court that had reshaped his understanding of justice. That moment, Stanton said before the Senate Judiciary Committee, taught me that the law is not about wielding authority, but about serving people. It reminded me that every decision I make affects real lives, and that my duty is to approach each case with empathy, fairness, and humility. As a Supreme Court justice, Stanton continued to embody these principles. His opinions often drew from Eleanor's teachings, and he frequently collaborated with her on articles and public statements that addressed pressing issues in the justice system. His voice became a powerful force for progress, championing reforms that prioritized equality and accountability. The bond between Eleanor and Stanton deepened further with time. Their friendship evolved into a partnership that transcended professional boundaries, rooted in mutual respect and a shared commitment to their cause. They spoke often, sometimes about the challenges they faced in their respective roles, and other times simply to reflect on the journey they had shared. One particularly meaningful collaboration emerged when they co-authored a book titled Justice Without Blindfolds, a call for humanizing the legal system. The book explored their personal journeys, the lessons they had learned, and their vision for a judiciary that prioritized fairness and compassion. It became an instant bestseller, sparking widespread dialogue and influencing legal education worldwide. The book's success led to a global speaking tour, where the two addressed audiences ranging from law students to international legal bodies. In every setting, their message remained consistent. Justice was a shared responsibility, and meaningful change required both individual introspection and systemic reform. At one event in Geneva, Eleanor addressed a packed auditorium of legal professionals from around the world. Her voice, though slightly softer with age, carried the same conviction it always had. Justice, she said, is not about perfection. It is about progress. It is about recognizing our own flaws and working tirelessly to ensure those flaws do not define the systems we uphold. Stanton, speaking after her, built on her point. My own journey is a testament to this truth, he said. I was not born a fair judge. I became one because I had a mentor who believed in the power of accountability and learning. That is what we must strive for, a legal system that allows for growth and redemption, not just for those it serves, but also for those who serve within it. The audience rose in a standing ovation, many visibly moved by the depth of their message. Their words resonated because they spoke not just of ideals but of lived experience, of lessons learned the hard way and the determination to transform those lessons into meaningful change. Back in the United States, their work inspired a new wave of reform. Courts began adopting practices that emphasized restorative justice, focusing on rehabilitation and reconciliation rather than punitive measures. Judicial training programs incorporated modules on bias, many of them based directly on Eleanor's research and Stanton's courtroom reflections. Eleanor and Stanton also became mentors to a new generation of leaders. Through the Maxwell Stanton Fellowship and other initiatives, they cultivated a network of young professionals committed to advancing their vision of justice. These protégés carried their teachings into diverse fields, from law and policy to education and community organizing. As the years went by, Eleanor began to scale back her public engagements, though she remained deeply involved in her mentoring and research. Stanton, now one of the most respected justices on the Supreme Court, often sought her counsel, valuing her insights as much as ever. In her later years, Eleanor reflected on her life's work with quiet satisfaction. She saw her influence not in the awards and accolades she had received, but in the lives she had touched and the changes she had helped bring about. One evening, as she sat in her study, surrounded by letters from former students and colleagues, she smiled to herself. The fight for justice, she knew, was never truly over, but it was a fight worth dedicating a lifetime to. For Stanton, the memory of that day in traffic court remained a guiding force. It reminded him of where he had started and how far he had come. But more importantly, it reminded him of the enduring power of humility, mentorship, and accountability. As he looked out over the courtroom from his seat on the nation's highest bench, he carried with him the lessons that Eleanor had taught him, lessons that would continue to shape his decisions and inspire those who followed in his footsteps. Together, Eleanor Maxwell and Robert Stanton proved that justice was not just a lofty ideal but a living, breathing practice. Their story, rooted in a moment of conflict and redemption, became a timeless reminder of what was possible when individuals chose to learn, grow, and work together to build a better world. As Eleanor Maxwell entered her twilight years, her influence continued to expand, subtly yet profoundly shaping the legal world. The Maxwell-Stanton Fellowship had grown into a national institution, producing a new generation of lawyers, judges, and policymakers who carried her values forward. Though she began to step back from public life, her presence was still felt in every courtroom where fairness prevailed, every legal decision informed by compassion, and every classroom where a student dared to challenge injustice. Robert Stanton, now a seasoned Supreme Court justice, often found himself reflecting on the lessons Eleanor had instilled in him. Despite his position on the nation's highest court, he never forgot the humility he had learned in her classroom and that fateful day in traffic court. He frequently returned to her writings and research, drawing inspiration for the complex cases that came before him. One such case involved a contentious issue of voting rights. The nation was deeply divided, and the stakes were enormous. Stanton, assigned to write the majority opinion, approached the task with the gravity it deserved. He spent weeks poring over the evidence, considering not only the legal arguments, but also the broader implications of his decision. In his opinion, Stanton quoted Eleanor once again, her words as relevant as ever. "The law is not an island. It exists within a society shaped by history, power, and inequality. To interpret the law without considering these contexts is to do a disservice to justice itself." His opinion, hailed as one of the most insightful and humane in the court's history, reinforced protections for marginalized voters and became a landmark decision that would shape the democratic process for generations. Eleanor, though now mostly retired, followed the case closely. When she read Stanton's opinion, she felt a deep sense of pride, not for herself, but for the student who had grown into a leader she had always believed he could be. She wrote him a short note, as she often did, congratulating him on his work and reminding him, as only she could, that the journey of learning and growth never truly ended. Stanton, ever grateful for her mentorship, kept the note framed on his desk, a daily reminder of the responsibility that came with his role. In quiet moments, he often thought about how their paths had crossed and the profound impact Eleanor had on his life. Her influence had guided him through some of the most challenging decisions of his career, and he was determined to honor her legacy with every choice he made. As time passed, Eleanor's health began to decline. Though her mind remained sharp, her physical strength waned, and she spent more time at home, surrounded by the books and letters that chronicled her extraordinary life. Former students and colleagues visited often, eager to share their achievements and thank her for the role she had played in their journeys. One afternoon, Stanton visited her. The two sat in her sunlit study, reminiscing about the years they had shared and the work they had done. Eleanor, frail but still spirited, looked at him with a twinkle in her eye. "You've done well, Robert," she said, "but don't think for a second that you're finished. There's always more to learn, more to do." Stanton smiled, his respect for her as deep as ever. "I wouldn't dare think otherwise, Professor," he replied. "You've taught me that the work is never done, and for that, I'll always be grateful." Their conversation drifted from memories to musings about the future. Eleanor expressed her hope that the seeds they had planted together would continue to grow, shaping a legal system that truly served all people. Stanton promised to carry her vision forward, ensuring that her lessons would live on not just in his work, but in the work of those he mentored. A few months later, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her funeral, attended by hundreds, was a testament to the lives she had touched. Judges, lawyers, students, and community members gathered to celebrate her legacy, sharing stories of how her teachings had inspired them to pursue justice with integrity and compassion. Stanton delivered the eulogy, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Dr. Eleanor Maxwell was more than a teacher, he said. She was a force of nature, a beacon of hope, and a relentless advocate for justice. She believed in the power of the law to make the world better, but more importantly, she believed in the power of people to use the law for good. Her lessons will endure, not because of the words she wrote or the lecture she gave, but because of the lives she transformed. After the service, Stanton returned to the Supreme Court with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the best way to honor Eleanor was to continue the work they had started together, to fight for a legal system that reflected the ideals she had dedicated her life to. In the years that followed, Stanton's opinions often carried echoes of Eleanor's wisdom, her words woven into the fabric of his legal reasoning. Her legacy also lived on through the Maxwell-Stanton Fellowship, which grew into a global initiative. Fellows worked on groundbreaking cases, developed innovative policies, and led efforts to reform legal systems in countries around the world. Each one carried a piece of Eleanor's spirit, ensuring that her vision for justice would never fade. Though Eleanor was gone, her presence remained palpable in every step Stanton took, every decision he made, and every life her teachings continued to touch. She had shown him, and so many others, that justice was not a static ideal, but a living, breathing practice, one that demanded humility, courage, and an unwavering commitment to fairness. In the quiet of his chambers late one evening, Stanton looked up at the framed note from Eleanor, her familiar handwriting a steady reminder of the journey they had shared. He smiled, knowing that her voice would always guide him, just as it had on that unforgettable day in traffic court so many years ago. In the years following Eleanor Maxwell's passing, her influence only deepened, her legacy becoming a guiding light for those committed to justice. Robert Stanton, now one of the most revered figures in the judiciary, often reflected on the profound impact she had on his life and career. Her lessons echoed in every decision he made, every opinion he authored, and every young legal mind he mentored. As Stanton continued his tenure on the Supreme Court, he found himself facing some of the most challenging and divisive cases in the nation's history. The country was grappling with issues that tested the very foundations of its legal and moral principles. Cases involving racial justice, gender equality, environmental protection, and the balance of power between government branches. Stanton approached each with the same deliberate thoughtfulness that had come to define his judicial philosophy, always keeping Eleanor's words in mind. One such case involved a constitutional challenge to a controversial law that many argued disproportionately targeted marginalized communities. The arguments were complex, the stakes immense. Stanton knew the decision would not only affect millions of lives, but also set a precedent for generations to come. He spent countless hours in his chambers, poring over legal briefs, historical documents, and precedents. He also reflected deeply on the broader implications of the case, drawing from the lessons he had learned from Eleanor about empathy, context, and the responsibility of power. When the court's decision was finally announced, Stanton's majority opinion became an instant landmark. It struck down the law, citing its discriminatory impact and reaffirming the constitutional principles of equality and due process. His reasoning was both meticulous and heartfelt, weaving together legal analysis with a profound acknowledgement of the law's role in shaping society. The opinion concluded with a line inspired by Eleanor's teachings. Justice is not blind to context. It must see clearly to correct the wrongs that history has left in its wake. The decision was celebrated by many as a victory for human rights and a testament to the judiciary's capacity for fairness and progress. Legal scholars hailed Stanton's opinion as a masterwork, a blend of legal rigor and moral clarity that reaffirmed the judiciary's role as a guardian of the Constitution's promise. Yet, Stanton remained humble in the face of praise. He knew that the decision was not his alone. It was the culmination of decades of mentorship, collaboration, and the enduring influence of Eleanor Maxwell. He often said, "Every good decision I make carries her imprint." She taught me that justice is not just about what the law allows, but what it demands of us as human beings. Meanwhile, the Maxwell-Stanton Fellowship continued to thrive, expanding its reach and impact. The fellows, inspired by Eleanor's vision and Stanton's example, tackled some of the most pressing issues of their time. They worked on cases that sought to dismantle systemic inequality, advocated for reforms that made the justice system more transparent and accessible, and developed innovative approaches to restorative justice. One of the most ambitious projects led by the fellows was a nationwide effort to review and reform sentencing practices in criminal courts. The project revealed significant disparities in how sentences were applied, particularly along racial and economic lines. The findings sparked a wave of reforms, with courts across the country adopting new guidelines aimed at reducing bias and ensuring fairness. The project's success was widely attributed to the mentorship and guidance provided by Stanton and the foundation of research laid by Eleanor. As the years went on, Stanton became a mentor not only to the fellows but also to his colleagues on the bench. Younger judges often sought his advice, drawn to his thoughtful approach and his willingness to acknowledge his own growth and shortcomings. He never shied away from sharing the story of his encounter with Eleanor in traffic court, framing it not as a moment of shame, but as a turning point that had shaped him into the judge he was today. Stanton's commitment to mentorship extended beyond the legal community. He frequently spoke at universities, community centers, and public forums, using his platform to advocate for a more just and equitable society. In his speeches, he often emphasized the importance of self-reflection and accountability, urging his audiences to recognize their own biases and to strive for fairness in all aspects of their lives. At one such event, a young woman approached Stanton after his talk. She was a law student and a Maxwell Stanton Fellow, her eyes shining with determination. "Justice Stanton," she said, "your story and Professor Maxwell's legacy have inspired me to pursue a career in public interest law. I want to make a difference, just like you both have." Stanton smiled, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "You already are," he replied. "The fact that you're here, committed to this work, means you're carrying her legacy forward. Remember, justice isn't about grand gestures. It's about the choices we make every day to do what's right." The encounter stayed with Stanton, a reminder of the enduring power of Eleanor's teachings and the responsibility he carried to honor her legacy. As he returned to his chambers that evening, he thought about how far they had come since that day in traffic court. What began as a moment of conflict and reckoning had grown into a movement that was transforming the legal system and inspiring a new generation of leaders. In his final years on the Supreme Court, Stanton continued to champion the principles that Eleanor had instilled in him. His opinions reflected a deep commitment to fairness, empathy, and the pursuit of justice. Even as he prepared for retirement, he remained actively involved in the fellowship and other initiatives, ensuring that the work they had started together would continue long after he stepped down from the bench. When Stanton eventually retired, his departure was marked by an outpouring of gratitude and admiration from colleagues, legal scholars, and the public. His career was celebrated not only for its achievements, but also for the humility and humanity he had brought to the judiciary. In his farewell address, Stanton once again paid tribute to Eleanor Maxwell, acknowledging her as the foundation of his journey. "Eleanor Maxwell taught me that justice is not a destination, but a practice," he said. "It is a commitment we renew every day in every decision we make. I can only hope that my work has honored her teachings and that it will inspire others to carry them forward." After his retirement, Stanton continued to serve as an advisor and mentor, his influence extending far beyond the courtroom. He remained a beloved figure, not just for his legal acumen, but for the compassion and wisdom that defined his life's work. And so, the legacy of Eleanor Maxwell and Robert Stanton endured, a testament to the power of mentorship, accountability, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. Their story, rooted in a single moment of humility and growth, became a beacon for all who sought to make the world a fairer, more equitable place. Through their work and the countless lives they touched, they proved that justice is not just a principle to be upheld, but a promise to be fulfilled, one decision at a time. After Robert Stanton's retirement from the Supreme Court, his life took on a quieter rhythm, though the ripples of his influence remained far-reaching. Freed from the weight of judicial responsibility, he turned his attention fully to mentorship and public advocacy, roles he had always cherished. His collaboration with the Maxwell Stanton Fellowship deepened, and he traveled extensively, meeting young legal minds eager to learn from his decades of experience. Stanton often reflected on how much of his journey had been shaped by Eleanor Maxwell's unwavering belief in the transformative power of education and accountability. To honor her legacy further, he helped establish the Maxwell Center for Justice and Equity, a research and training institute dedicated to exploring innovative approaches to fairness in the legal system. The center became a hub for groundbreaking work, attracting scholars, practitioners, and activists from around the world. At the heart of the Maxwell Center was a simple yet profound mission: to ensure that the law served as a tool for justice, rather than a mechanism of oppression. The center's programs range from workshops on implicit bias to community-led initiatives aimed at bridging the gap between legal institutions and the people they served. Stanton took great pride in his role as an advisor, often hosting intimate discussions where participants could challenge traditional ideas and propose bold solutions. One of the center's most ambitious projects was the Equity and Justice Initiative, a collaborative effort to address systemic disparities in sentencing and access to legal representation. Under Stanton's guidance, the initiative worked closely with judges, public defenders, and community leaders to develop practical reforms. The resulting policies, implemented in multiple jurisdictions, led to measurable decreases in sentencing disparities and increased trust in the judicial process. Though Stanton's work kept him busy, he often found time to revisit the places and people that had shaped him. He returned to Columbia University to deliver guest lectures, and he frequently visited the courts where he had once served. In those moments, he felt the weight of the journey he had undertaken, a journey that had begun with a humbling moment in traffic court and evolved into a lifetime of service to justice. One particularly poignant visit took Stanton back to the courthouse where he had first encountered Eleanor Maxwell as a defendant. Standing in the courtroom, he felt a wave of emotion as he remembered the tension, the silence, and the life-changing realization of his own biases. The courtroom had not changed much over the years, but Stanton knew that its significance in his life was immeasurable. He addressed a group of young judges gathered there for a training session, sharing the story that had become so central to his identity. "This room," he began, his voice steady but filled with feeling, "is where I learned the most important lesson of my career. It wasn't about the law or procedure. It was about seeing people, truly seeing them, and understanding the responsibility we carry as arbiters of justice." The judges listened intently, many visibly moved. Stanton's words carried the weight of experience, and his willingness to admit his own failings made his message all the more powerful. By the time he finished, the room was silent, the kind of silence that signaled deep reflection and resolve. Outside the courtroom, Stanton paused to take in the moment. He thought about Eleanor and how much she had taught him, not just through her lectures, but through her example. She had shown him that justice was not static, that it required constant effort and vigilance. And in doing so, she had given him the tools to become the judge and the person he aspired to be. As Stanton walked away, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Though his formal career had ended, his mission was far from over. He knew that the fight for justice was ongoing, and he was determined to spend the rest of his days contributing in whatever way he could. Meanwhile, the Maxwell Stanton Fellowship continued to grow, its alumni network becoming a force for change across the globe. Fellows led groundbreaking legal cases, developed progressive policies, and mentored the next generation of leaders. Each carried a piece of Eleanor's vision and Stanton's dedication, ensuring that their legacy lived on in meaningful and tangible ways. Years later, as Stanton approached the final chapter of his life, he remained as committed as ever to the ideals that had defined his journey. On his 90th birthday, the Maxwell Center organized a celebration in his honor, bringing together friends, colleagues, and former fellows to pay tribute to his extraordinary contributions. The event was held in a grand hall filled with photographs and memorabilia from Stanton's career. As he entered, the room erupted into applause, a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Stanton, though visibly moved, remained humble, waving modestly and smiling warmly at the faces before him. During the evening, Several speakers shared stories of how Stanton had touched their lives. One former fellow, now a prominent judge, recounted how Stanton's mentorship had shaped her approach to the bench. "He didn't just teach me how to be a judge," she said. "He taught me how to be a better person, to lead with empathy and integrity. For that, I will always be grateful." When it was Stanton's turn to speak, he addressed the room with his characteristic humility. "I've been fortunate," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Fortunate to learn from the best, first from Eleanor Maxwell, and later from all of you. This work, this journey has never been about one person. It's about all of us working together to make the world a little fairer, a little kinder. That's the legacy we must continue to build." As he spoke, Stanton felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had lived a life guided by the principles Eleanor had taught him, and he had done his best to pass those lessons on. The room erupted in applause once more as Stanton concluded his speech, his words resonating deeply with everyone present. In the quiet years that followed, Stanton spent his time writing, reflecting, and staying connected to the people and causes he cared about. He passed away peacefully at the age of 94, leaving behind a legacy that was as vast as it was profound. Eleanor Maxwell and Robert Stanton's shared story became a timeless reminder of the power of humility, mentorship, and accountability. Their partnership, rooted in a single moment of reckoning, had grown into a movement that transformed lives and reshaped the justice system. And though they were no longer physically present, their teachings and values continued to inspire generations, proving that the pursuit of justice is a journey without end, one that demands courage, compassion, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of change. After Robert Stanton's passing, the legacy he shared with Eleanor Maxwell became a story passed down not just in legal circles, but across disciplines and professions. Their names were synonymous with justice, reform, and the enduring power of accountability. The Maxwell Stanton Fellowship was renamed the Maxwell Stanton Institute for Justice, an expansive global network dedicated to fostering fairness and equity in all areas of law and governance. The Institute became a sanctuary for those who sought meaningful change, a place where young professionals could immerse themselves in the teachings of Maxwell and Stanton. Its core programs expanded beyond the legal field to include public policy, education, and community activism. The interdisciplinary approach reflected Eleanor's and Stanton's belief that justice required collaboration across boundaries: social, cultural, and professional. Among the Institute's new initiatives was a program called Echoes of Justice, which used storytelling to connect people from different walks of life. Defendants, judges, attorneys, and community leaders would share their experiences, offering perspectives on how the justice system affected their lives. These stories, raw and unfiltered, helped build understanding and empathy among participants, and many described the program as transformative. The program was inspired by Eleanor's approach in her classroom and Stanton's humility in the courtroom. It served as a reminder that behind every case, every ruling, and every policy were human lives, each deserving of dignity and respect. One of the most notable participants in Echoes of Justice was a young public defender named Sofia Rivera, who had grown up in a disadvantaged neighborhood where encounters with the legal system were often harsh and dehumanizing. Rivera's experiences as a child had inspired her to pursue a career in law, determined to be the voice for those who felt unheard. Through her work, Rivera became a fierce advocate for marginalized communities, often citing Maxwell and Stanton as her inspiration. "Their story reminds me," she said during a session, "that no matter how broken a system might seem, there is always room for change, if we are willing to confront our own biases and fight for fairness." Rivera's words resonated with many, and she quickly became a leader within the Institute. She spearheaded a project to expand access to legal representation in underserved areas, drawing from lessons learned at the Institute and her own experiences in the field. Under her leadership, the project reduced case backlogs and provided critical support to thousands of individuals who would otherwise have faced the system alone. Meanwhile, the teachings of Maxwell and Stanton became standard curriculum in law schools around the world. Professors built entire courses around their writings, and the pivotal courtroom moment that had reshaped Stanton's career. Students were encouraged to examine their own biases and consider how their decisions might affect not just legal outcomes but societal well-being. A new generation of lawyers and judges emerged from these programs, carrying forward the values Eleanor and Stanton had championed. They approached their work with empathy and a deep understanding of the systemic issues that plague the justice system. They formed coalitions, advocated for reforms, and mentored others, ensuring that the movement Eleanor and Stanton had sparked would continue to grow. Years after Stanton's death, a statue of him and Eleanor was unveiled at the entrance to the Maxwell Stanton Institute. The sculpture, titled The Lesson, depicted Eleanor standing beside Stanton, a book in one hand and her other hand resting lightly on his shoulder, as if guiding him forward. Stanton, slightly younger in the sculpture, was depicted holding a gavel, his expression contemplative. The piece captured the essence of their partnership, one of mentorship, growth, and an unwavering commitment to justice. At the statue's unveiling, Sofia Rivera gave a speech to an audience of hundreds, including students, legal professionals, and community members. "This statue is more than a tribute to two remarkable individuals," she said. "It is a reminder that justice is a journey that requires us to learn from one another, to challenge ourselves, and to never stop striving for what is right." The crowd erupted into applause, their faces lit with admiration and inspiration. For many, the statue symbolized not just the story of Maxwell and Stanton, but the shared responsibility of everyone in the room to continue their work. As the years went on, the Institute's influence spread further. Partnerships with international organizations brought its programs to countries struggling with corruption, inequality, and broken judicial systems. The lessons of humility and accountability transcended borders, proving that the principles Eleanor and Stanton had lived by were universal. Their legacy also became a part of popular culture. A critically acclaimed film based on their story, titled Beyond the Bench, brought their journey to a global audience. The film captured the pivotal moments of their lives, from Eleanor's quiet yet commanding presence in Stanton's courtroom to Stanton's transformative journey toward becoming a fair and compassionate judge. It won multiple awards and reignited conversations about the importance of justice in everyday life. For those who knew their story well, the film was a faithful tribute. But for the Maxwell Stanton Institute and the countless individuals inspired by their work, it was also a call to action, a reminder that justice required constant vigilance and that every individual had a role to play in its pursuit. Even decades later, their story continued to inspire. The phrase Maxwell's wisdom and Stanton's humility became a shorthand for ethical leadership in the legal profession. Their shared journey proved that change was possible, that accountability was not a sign of weakness, but a source of strength, and that even the smallest moments, a traffic ticket, a classroom discussion, could spark profound transformations. In the end, Eleanor Maxwell and Robert Stanton's legacy was not just about the changes they had made, but about the people they had empowered. Through their example, they had shown that justice was not a solitary endeavor, but a collective responsibility, one that demanded courage, compassion, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of a better world. And in the hearts and minds of those they inspired, their journey continued, an enduring testament to the transformative power of humility, mentorship, and the relentless pursuit of fairness. As the scene unfolds, Sofia Rivera stands in the grand hall of the Maxwell Stanton Institute, her voice carrying the weight of generations of struggle and triumph. She delivers a rousing speech about justice, progress, and the responsibility that lies within everyone to fight for fairness. The audience erupts in applause, but as the camera pans across the crowd, the focus shifts to a shadowed figure standing at the back of the room. This person, cloaked in anonymity, watches Sofia with intense interest before slipping quietly out of the hall. The camera follows their retreat down the dimly lit corridors of the Institute, the sound of their hurried footsteps echoing ominously. They reach a nondescript door, glancing around to ensure no one is watching before unlocking it and stepping inside. Inside the room, walls are covered with documents, photos, and newspaper clippings. all connected by a web of red string. At the center of this chaotic collage are two faces, Eleanor Maxwell and Robert Stanton. Their legacies, their stories, their impact. Everything is meticulously documented. But beneath the photos, scrawled in thick, black ink, are the words, "truth buried. Justice manipulated, asterisk." The figure pulls out a phone and dials a number. Their voice, low and gravelly, carries a chilling undertone. Phase 1 is complete. It's time to reveal what they tried to hide. As they hang up, the camera zooms in on a single document pinned to the wall. An old case file stamped with the words "classified," "restricted access." The audience is given only a fleeting glimpse of the details, but it's enough to hint at something earth-shattering, a secret tied to Maxwell and Stanton's journey, something that could shatter the foundation of their legacy. The screen cuts to Sofia Rivera walking through the Institute late at night. Her phone buzzes with an anonymous message. She stops, puzzled, as she reads it. Asterisk, "You're fighting for the wrong side. Meet me at the old courthouse if you want to know the truth." Asterisk. The tension escalates as Sofia debates her next move. The screen flashes to her determined face as she grabs her coat and heads out into the darkness. Meanwhile, the shadowed figure watches her leave through a security feed, their expression unreadable. The final scene shows Sofia standing outside the courthouse, her breath visible in the cold night air. She cautiously steps inside, the eerie silence amplifying her footsteps. Suddenly, a faint voice echoes from the darkness. You think you know the whole story, but you don't. What if everything you believed was a lie? The camera pans to Sofia's startled face, her expression a mix of confusion and fear. The screen fades to black, and a single line of text appears. Asterisk, "This is far from over. In fact, it's only just begun." Asterisk, "Justice, secrets, and a fight for truth. What happens next will change everything." What do you think lies behind the shadows? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in this gripping story.